Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to URM's webinar today. Today we're going to discuss how to improve your supplier information security risk management. We're going to go through a few different topics. My name is Lauren. I'm the new business manager here at URM. And today I'm joined by Matt Thomas, who is one of URM's directors and is responsible for URM's products and overall risk with the business. Today's agenda. So we are going to look at why is supplier risk management so important. It's becoming increasingly more important across a number of areas. So we're going to really dive into some detail there. We're also going to look on how do you assess and manage the risks associated with your suppliers. So there's a few different topics we're going to cover there in a bit. Of the process, so categorizing and prioritizing your suppliers, conducting the supplier due diligence, and then actually implementing risk treatment controls. We'll then dive into what should you audit with your most critical suppliers, what should you be looking at, and when should suppliers be involved when it comes to exercise incident management plans. Again, another topic that is just growing and becoming more important. And at the end then we'll also open the floor up to any questions. If you do have any throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat box and we'll address them as they come through if it's appropriate, or again at the end of the presentation. Before we dive into the details, for anyone that's new to URM, just to give you a little bit of an introduction about us. So we've got so close to 20 years experience. We've been around 19 years, 20th anniversary next year, very exciting. And in that time, we have provided expert advice and consultancy around a number of topics, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, penetration testing, supplier risk management as well. And what really sets us apart from others is our holistic approach. So we've got our governance, risk and compliance team alongside our technical experts as well, so can cover a broad range of areas in terms of security. And lastly, we do have a team of people that have worked both sides of the fence, yes, but also are really passionate about helping clients improve. That's our main driver is to get clients to where they need to be, minimize risk and make them, I suppose, more secure in general. So yeah, my name's Lauren. I've been on a few webinars if you've been to any previous events, and I'll hand over to Matt to introduce himself.
Super, thank you, Lauren. So my name's Matt Thomas. I'm one of the directors at URM, and so as we've got up on the slides, sort of 15 plus years of experience in a range of sort of technical security aspects, and also risk management and InfoSec in a sort of a wider sense. So I'm also a PCI DSS QSA.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. So if we dive into the first topic, so let's go back to why is supplier risk management so important to organisations nowadays?
So really the importance of supplier risk management, we wanted to try and highlight some metrics, some stats to be able to highlight how important this is. The first comes from RSM, the professional services firm, conduct an annual report called the Real Economy Report. And so what they found within that survey was that over half of suppliers to the respondents from the survey had a cyber attack within the last 12 months. And so to further to support that is that the SANS Institute in a recent survey found that if you were to suffer a breach, there's a 70% chance that that's as a result of one of your suppliers, one of your vendors. So really those two combined together gives a kind of highlight how critical it is to be able to understand the risks that your suppliers pose. Also, the interesting stat from the UK government cyber breaches survey that's conducted annually, so this result was from 2024, was just 1 in 10 organisations have actually conduct conducted a review to understand the risks associated with their suppliers.
So that 70% probability there, maybe more businesses should be looking at their supplier risk management. That's really high.
You're absolutely right, Lauren. It really is that they as we say here, suppliers are omnipresent. Suppliers are crucial and critical to many different business processes. So what the idea of the supplier risk management process is that you understand what those suppliers are doing for you, understanding the information that you're sharing with them, and that you understand the controls that they have in place and potentially weaknesses, so that you can either put in place improvements or safeguards and really understand the risk. So as part of this supplier risk management, it is all about developing and maintaining these relationships and improving that trust with those suppliers, but also with your customers and stakeholders. There's also finally another part that is a number of different standards require and regulations require that you undertake this exercise. So having understanding of your risk management of your supplier profile is kind of key. With, for example, if we were looking at PCI DSS, it's a key aspect in terms of understanding those suppliers and how they deliver to you.
And GDPR is another one, right? With sort of regulation that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a topic that we'll touch on again and again, is that when it comes to personal data, understanding the sub-processors, any kind of processing that's being done on behalf of you as an organization is really key and critical.
Yep. There's a lot of that going on now with the world, isn't there? You can outsource pretty much anything now.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So if we can now begin to look at how an organization can actually assess and manage risks associated with suppliers, which I'm sure is no easy feat with businesses that have a lot of suppliers.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So what we've tried to do is to break this down into a kind of an understandable workflow, a methodology of how that you should conduct this assessment. So into these 8 stages, starting with hopefully what is fairly obvious, is that you need to identify all your suppliers. But we've got some hints and tips in terms of how you should do this. Then working through, we want to kind of categorize those suppliers based on the services they provide you. We want to prioritize them, so to understand how critical they are. We then want to think about actually gathering information from them to understand those risks, and understanding that all of that information to try and determine that level of risk. So on to 6, we then think about, well, actually, what's the treatment action? What are we going to do about all of that information analysis that we've performed? There's a number of different options that we can take. Just like with any risk, there's different ways, different means of dealing with that risk. And just to sort of highlight, this isn't a one-off exercise. There's this continued need to monitor, to measure, to analyse and evaluate this continued improvements and aspects, and continuing to reassess. So there could be a big area that goes from that 8 back to the 1, in almost to continue this process again and again. So if we now kind of jump into some of the detail associated with these areas. So first off, we want to try and compile a list of all suppliers. What we've said is really all suppliers that store, process, or transmit your information. So trying to cast the net quite wide, we're trying to think about all suppliers, not just IT providers. We've given some examples of cloud providers, or a software vendor, or data software providers.
Matt, any advice on an organisation that might not necessarily know who their suppliers are?
No, indeed, it's quite common actually, that especially when you get to a certain size, that maybe the procurement function is maturing, and so there's different ways of engaging with suppliers. So a good way is to start with the money. Follow the money. You speak with the finance department, try and understand, okay, who are the suppliers that we pay. So this isn't a straightforward exercise. Obviously, there's going to be different contract terms, different aspects of renewal. Then you may have some suppliers almost from a software as a service aspect that people are purchasing and paying through expenses. Obviously, not a recommended approach, but there's all of these different ways of people engaging with suppliers and working those out. So it's starting with that and trying to understand that list, and then trying to refine that down, speaking with different levels of within the organisations, try and understand those different suppliers. But we want to focus on a whole range of different suppliers, and think about all those different areas. So what we've got now is just an example of a software tool that we have, a Brisker, which has a module within it which is all around supplier risk management. I'm going to come back to this sort of dashboard screen several times throughout the presentation, so I won't go into all the detail that's on this page. But the idea is that what we want to be able to understand is to identify that list of suppliers. So you can see down the left-hand side, we've got a range of different suppliers that we've identified, and we're going to be coming back to this to be able to say, okay, where we are with it. Because what we're going to want to be able to do is then work through a process to understand all of those suppliers, work through categorizing them, prioritizing them, getting them to kind of register and work through and provide that information, and ultimately make a risk decision at the end of this, so that we can say, well, actually, is that outsourced call center that we're working with, are they providing appropriate levels of control for the information that's being shared with them, which could be quite sensitive. So the next step is about categorizing those suppliers based on the services provided. So it's thinking about those common themes or common sort of control areas. So if we think back to that previous screen, we've got an outsourced call center. Obviously, they may be processing personal data. They may have access to information, whereas you may have a separate organization that provides people and they come on your site. So those sorts of aspects, the control areas might be a little bit different.
Sorry, Matt, in terms of categorizing suppliers, are there defined categories, or would you choose the categories in terms of they're supplying people or they're supplying software?
Yeah. So on the next slide, I've got some examples of what the sort of categories that we look like, that we sort of tend to recommend and tend to sort of think about. And it really depends on you as an organization and how you engage with suppliers. There may be some organisations that very much limit that access down, and that there aren't any suppliers who have, say, for example, connectivity to your network, or that have access to your systems. It's all done through certain other sort of secure means. But so what we want to be able to do is try and find out what's common within your supplier base, so that we can ask relevant questions to relevant areas. The bit that we want to make sure is to try and improve the quality of the answers that people are providing by asking a relevant question and asking a subset.
Okay.
So these categories are going to be, we've got them shown within here. So we've associated the number of different suppliers, like we said on the previous screen, and we have these different categories. So if you go one more, we then see that we've built up these categories, and so that they reference back to the previous reference numbers that were shown on the slide previous. And so the sorts of things we're thinking about is, okay, we're going to have a set of baseline security requirements that we in this instance we've called all suppliers. So this might be things like that we want to send out aspects around how they do awareness training for their staff, how they have that we've signed an NDA with them, that we've got contracts in place. There might be some baseline security requirements that we're going to ask all suppliers, and then the follow-on questions come on depending on what they do. So if they're a cloud provider, they might have more or less questions than if they process confidential information of ours. Then actually there's going to be more sensitive aspects.
So one supplier could have could be assigned many different categories, and then have different number of questions and requirements to work with you.
That's it. So okay. We're tailoring that questionnaire list based on the number of different areas that they've got. So we want to, whilst we also want to make this a tailored list, we want to give some level of consistency. If there's both me and you, Lauren, assessing suppliers, we want to make sure that if I'm assessing them, then and that you assess them next year, there's a bit of commonality, and that we can kind of get repeatable results, and that it doesn't rely too much on me assessing them or you as an individual, so that there's a process behind it.
That makes sense, because I'd probably start off with asking them, do you have a dog or something like that, and that would that's how I'd base my judgment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, indeed.
Brilliant.
So what we've got at that point is we've got a list of suppliers, and we're trying to understand what they do for us as an organisation, because for those of you that are listening that are from small organisations, you may find that, well, actually we know our suppliers, we know what they do, but for larger organisations, getting the nuanced detail of how different suppliers and the services they provide can be quite difficult. So next step is thinking about the priority of them. So we've provided a sort of an example here of what that priority scale might look like from a high, medium, and low. So you might say, okay, our high risk suppliers are those that access our critical data. Whereas our medium might have more access to sort of more internal systems or user data, or and then finally low risks have minimal access to sensitive information, so very, very limited.
Matt, where would I know MSPs are growing, and there's a lot of organisations that use MSPs for their IT. Where would they typically fit on average?
Indeed. I think because they have a place where they not only have access and process a lot of your information, but they also manage a lot of the controls on your behalf. I think typically we see those as kind of high risk suppliers.
Okay.
So we would be looking more at those areas.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
So again, what we've got here is we've got our suppliers, and we can see that we've assessed them in terms of criticality. So we've jumped over a couple of columns on this row, but the main thing here is that we've got the division that's associated with, in terms of what area of the business, what business unit it's associated with, a relationship manager, so who's responsible for that person internally, and then just to the left of those, the supplier contact, the person who's actually going to be completing these questionnaires. So those first steps were all about trying to determine a questionnaire and to try and gather some information
and get organised. I guess it's just getting organised initially.
No, exactly that. So then what we then want to think about is how are we going to get this information from our suppliers, and I must say the overwhelming most used format is obviously a questionnaire. And this can be really down to how you operate as an organisation. So there's organisations that have very complicated questionnaires with sort of branching logic within it, and there's sort of no yes or no's, but you have to answer a lot of free text. Or it might be that you have more questions that are asking yes and no, and maybe with some multiple choice aspects. And so hopefully, the more free text that you ask your suppliers, the more time they need to put into those responses, and equally, the more time that you would need to actually analyse those coming back. So it should be in a format that's appropriate to the supplier and the relationship that you have with those. So maybe your high risk suppliers having quite a lot of free text may be appropriate, whereas in this instance. So other than questionnaires, there are other ways of doing this, but it tends to be interrogating information that's publicly available. So you might be able to kind of understand some information about how an organization is set up based on what information is publicly available. So like, for example, on their website, if their website's quite out of date or running certain aspects, you might see that that might give you some kind of pointers towards that their patching isn't up to date, or those sorts of aspects. But overall, a questionnaire is really the first stage of this process.
Yeah. Matt, how would a business determine what questions should be asked, whether they are category 1, 4, 6, no matter what category? Where can people get the questions from?
Yeah. Okay. So So in terms of it's really to develop a set of questions based on best practice. So the best practice that we recommend is ISO 27001.
Yeah.
So if you take 27001 and its sister standard 27002, 27002 contains all of the best practice guidance that would say, for example, for network controls, that we recommend you have this, and this. Mm-hmm. So that you can take that and develop a list of questions based on that guidance to try and understand, have they implemented that? Also, what you could try and do is condense that. So rather than having 5 questions, maybe that can be condensed down to one question with multiple choice options that allows them to be able to answer that in a slightly more easy to use way.
And just your opinion, Matt, could questions be as simple as, do you have ISO 27001? Do you have Cyber Essentials? Do you have Cyber Essentials Plus? Could it be that high level?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it. Is where that provides you some information. So it would give you, if you asked, do you have Cyber Essentials, then from there you can obviously interpret that they've gone through the self-assessment process. They've marked that aspect, and a senior director has signed off that process. So you sort of say, okay, the Cyber Essentials Plus, there's a level of independence in that, so that gives you a little bit of additional assurance in terms of that process. You mentioned ISO 20001. Absolutely, I'd say that most questionnaires ask that, and other ISO standards. So, the business continuity standard, ISO 22301, it's then trying to understand, okay, well, actually, yes, you've got that, and it's been externally accredited. Does the scope cover it for us? Can you upload our certificate? And kind of all of those are sort of associated aspects to try and kind of get a level of assurance for that, what that covers.
Yeah, so dive in a little bit more than just a yes or no. You can put a few more questions around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In terms of, indeed. So what we've got is just a brief view of how Bristol accomplishes this in terms of. So we've got an overall view of the interface, and if we go on one, we can see that we can jump into a question, and we can see that for this particular questionnaire, there's 35 questions. And we're sort of asking some management responsibilities around how they manage information security incidents. We're asking yes and no answers. We've asked them to enter some additional details and upload some documents, so that hopefully all of this kind of provides a way of evidence. And
has this question been pulled from a standard or framework?
Yes, yeah, indeed. Yeah. So we based all of our questions off ISO 2002, basically.
Cool.
So brilliant. Yeah, so in terms of how to conduct your assessment, and we really wanted to, here, obviously, like any organisation, we receive lots of supplier assessments, and I'm sure
I do.
Lauren, in your role, you receive lots of them, and they come in a range of formats, and obviously spreadsheets are a popular format. So the pros, like we said, that there's familiarity with Microsoft Excel, and it's a low financial investment in terms of actually establishing a questionnaire. I think the cons can be that it's time consuming to kind of analyze some of these results, and also this is not particularly user friendly on either side. So you end up with something that maybe does it not quite provide what you need, but there's potential for errors, and we often see that those spreadsheets, those processes work and rely on individuals. They can have these almost single points of failure in that. So often spreadsheets can give them that.
And with spreadsheets, I always wonder this: are they manually assessed then? And is an assessment made based on the responses and that of the individual?
Yeah, and organisations may have different approaches. So that they may have quite comprehensive mechanisms where they can upload and kind of scan these spreadsheets and look for answers and all these aspects. Or it may just be like you say, a manual assessment. I think the difficulty from the organisation's perspective is it's trying to pick up on those bits that happen frequently. So if you wanted to kind of resend a questionnaire that just had a few elements, that can be a bit more time consuming because you're sending out a questionnaire. How do you share it between the different organisations? So, but yeah, there's a sort of a manual assessment at the end of it.
Yeah, and I guess very time consuming if you've got a lot of suppliers. That's
yeah,
the thing as well.
Yeah, indeed, and then so you probably then need some kind of process to manage all of those. So maybe you've got another spreadsheet that has a calendar of the questionnaires that you're sending out and all of these sorts of aspects. So in terms of obviously the tools, so obviously the reason we developed DeBrisk originally was that was to kind of help people with that side of things, to be able to kind of reduce some of the kind of admin burden, so that hopefully increase the reliability, repeatability, and consistency, more robust assessment, and giving more sort of ownership and that automation and time saving. So obviously there are some areas that can have high price points and training, but
So point number 5, Matt, assessing information against criticality to determine the level of risk.
Indeed, yeah. So basically, we've sent a tailored questionnaire to our supplier. We've received back some responses. So what's the first thing you need to do? Obviously, you need to read that questionnaire. You need to assess those responses back, and so it's then taking into account the fact that okay, they are a critical supplier. So you see here the example. We've got a HR provider. Well, we would expect some quite robust data security controls in place. Because of both the priority, obviously they're critical in terms of the aspects that they've got access to some sort of sensitive HR data and the fact that those particular areas. So the criticality is really determined by the relationship manager. So that's the person who understands how critical that supplier is. What we're then going to look at next is using, based on that criticality, trying to assess a level of risk. And that really comes down to then the board or your risk treatment process to be able to understand, okay, this particular supplier is a high risk. Actually, they are then it's an acceptable level of risk working with that supplier, or it's not. So the criticality really is determined by the people who understand what the supplier does for you, but actually then making a decision about the go or no go really comes down to your kind of risk treatment process.
Okay, so I could come to you as a director and say, I think this supplier is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
But if they, if they've got nothing in place, you could then say, actually, they're too much of a risk.
Yeah, indeed. So then when we look at the risk treatment, we then be thinking, okay, so and going to the next slide, but we're talking about then, we're going to reduce that risk. Maybe let's touch on that again.
Yeah.
But so in terms of, let's have a look in at the suppliers. So what we've got here is, again, our same suppliers. We can see over to the right hand side that we've got a level of risk score associated with them. So in terms of this top one, it's been assessed as high risk. The key aspect is that we want to be able to drill into the detail associated with these different risk areas. So the benefit of using the 27001 controls is that they're arranged into different control areas. So as we can see here, they have different kind of attributes. So we can see that within this particular supplier, we've rated them quite they're red level of risk in terms of their organizational, their people, or their technological, but their physical controls aren't as bad. They're still amber, but they're not as bad. So if we then drill again, we can then see that going into the technical controls, there's some technical controls around clock synchronization that are actually pretty good, but in terms of their logging controls are very poor. So being able to analyze down those questionnaires is quite important, because if you imagine we get a block of questions back and we want to then try and pinpoint the areas of weakness that we have within that area, and is that a concern to us?
And this has been pulled from the questionnaire phase. So
Yes.
they've input their answers in the questionnaire. This has been pulled and they said, actually, these are reds, these are greens, these are yellows, and gives you that data. Right. Okay. Okay.
So
that makes sense.
So to try and interrogate those questionnaires, try and get a little bit more detail from them.
Okay.
So the sixth set we split into two areas. So this is come to that risk treatment action. So we're going back to that previous example, Lauren, where you're saying, okay, you've brought a supplier to us and you said, okay, we really want to use them because they're going to really be able to bring value to the services that we deliver our customers. However, there's a significant risk there. So we've gone through that analysis. Then we get through to the sort of the 4 risk treatment options. And so depending how you've probably come across some of these before. So for example, treat, tolerate, transfer or terminate, or reduce, accept, share or avoid. So really reduce is that we want to be able to implement some controls to reduce this down. And we're gonna drill down into a little bit more detail in terms of the treatment side of things. But there's two ways that you could do it. It may be that we as an organization implement additional controls. So it could be that through the analysis you've identified that maybe they've got quite weak network controls. So actually, if they're going to have access to your systems, you're going to put in some additional controls in around their access to be able to kind of strengthen that access. Or as we said, supplier controls, where you really work with them and say, okay, we really want to work with you, but you need to be able to prove that you can have MFA on your systems before you can access our environment.
Matt, I find this one really alien because I've never imagined as part of this process you could, almost put controls into a supplier. How would an organization, counteract this with the likes of Microsoft, Azure, those critical suppliers that may be higher risk? What then?
And as I say, it's very difficult when you're working with larger suppliers where actually yes, speaking to them is hard enough. So actually, asking them to put additional controls in place is probably impossible. I think what we see with that is that most of the time that you're doing an assessment of a large cloud provider, like you said, Microsoft or AWS, is that really what you're doing is you're interrogating their sort of security center, so their online resource that kind of provides that level of insight, and that then with a lot of their services, there's a pay per security aspect. So you can pay an additional premium on that to have access to a higher level of service, to a high level security service. The other aspect that those security centers often have is SOC Type 2 reports. So those reports have a detailed audit of the controls and the elements that are in place. So that's a great way of being able to kind of get an understanding and a detail about, say, how do they create new users or how do they offboard particular areas. But absolutely, it's trying to see what information they provide and then be able to get to that level. And ultimately, if there's certain aspects, we're going to come back to a decision where we're moving on to the next point, that we have to accept it. That actually that we either it's a tolerable risk, or actually we can't afford those additional premium security products that the provider provides. So actually the board is not willing to invest in that. So actually they're going to make a risk acceptance, and as the process allows, we can go through and make that. Talking around next point around sharing or transferring the risk, within the aspect there is might be able to kind of purchase insurance that covers particular areas, or we might be able to kind of negotiate with the supplier around particular contracts that sort of says there is hold certain suppliers responsible for certain key elements or certain risks.
Could that be onboarding a new supplier to transfer the risk to another supplier?
Well, like you say, yeah, it could be that really actually, and that this kind of comes into that final point, that kind of terminate or avoid, that actually we're going to end the relationship with that supplier and we're going to move to this other supplier that provides this other service, because like you say, that and there may be those suppliers that are absolutely unique and that provide that, but in most instances there's a choice. It's a market.
Yes, in some cases that might be quite a tough call to make on what you actually do.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely, yeah, and indeed, and so. And that also, if you've got sort of a whole host of processes that have set up with this, and you may have a lot of legacy with that supplier, actually moving and transitioning away from it may be very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So this is almost the kind of an expansion really on that first point, that's that reducing. So we want to try and identify controls and think about where we can improve that. So again, we'd recommend using kind of best practice control sources. So 27001, 27002, 2022, that's got a list of controls that you can look into.
Are there any specific ISOs around supplier risk management?
Yeah, well, so there is within the 27000 series, there's 27036. Okay. So that has that is around establishing a framework for conducting supplier risk management, which goes into a lot of detail, but follows this process of understanding and analysing, evaluating, and ultimately putting in a monitoring mechanism around it. But so the key thing with this is identifying controls which are sort of hopefully go some way to address those risks that you've identified. So obviously, if there's lots of technical risks in place, then most probably the controls are going to be more technical in place. And this is not a sort of a one-stop or one size fits all process. It's going to be very tailored to the individual supplier that you're working with and the services that they provide to you. It's going to be quite unique for that individual aspect.
I suppose a lot of businesses can change quite
Yeah.
quickly, especially smaller, more agile suppliers could have different service offerings, change their technology quite often.
Almost what we're seeing with this process is that there's going to be stages where we're going to be going back to an earlier stage, because actually you've brought on a supplier that's doing X, and actually they're going and they're doing more with you now. They've suddenly started providing further development, things like this. So a key aspect for is thinking about the key requirements that you need to include within supplier contracts.
If you don't mind me jumping in here, so would you develop the contracts after you've gone through the process we've just discussed, those 6 steps? Then would you put a supplier contract in place?
So I think probably in practice they probably occur to some extent in parallel. So there may be once you've got a shortlist and once you've got an indication that actually they progress some way, and that actually they're going to be that you're going to be able to work together, that then that you tend to get the legal teams engaged and sort of start working on those contract aspects. So the key aspects that we want to look at within here are really making sure that we're sort of scoping around about areas of responsibility. So if, for example, going back to our managed service provider, and that they're providing, say, like a technical system. Okay, well, so they're providing an element of this. Are they patching the system, for example? So it would be that getting an understanding of the key aspects and key controls and who's responsible for what. That's really a key element of within there.
Is that really highlighted in PCI DSS?
Yeah, so in PCI it has a service provider responsibility matrix, which would have, in terms of for each of the requirements, are you responsible for it or are they not?
Okay.
So that's it. In terms of obviously a big part in contracts is where there is personal data being shared with a third party. And this comes down to if you're acting as the data controller and your suppliers are acting as the data processor. There's a lot of elements around how that data is, how its data is processed. If they're engaging with sub-processors, so are they engaging with subcontractors and those sorts of elements, and monitoring, measuring that. And a lot of the contracts that we see is the elements of being able to ensuring that they notify you in the event that they're changing or amending any of their sub processes. Again, a key element is instant reporting, so that we get an idea of obviously a lot of sort of regulatory frameworks have reporting time lines. So obviously in the event of a data protection issue, it's 72 hours from being made aware. So how those are being raised and reported through to you is key. So
people should include then what SLAs in terms of it. So if a supplier had a cyber breach or a cyber attack, they should have it in their contract that client will be notified by it.
And how there's that managing that incident and that incident response with that supplier.
Okay, yeah.
The right to audit, obviously, for your critical suppliers, and I think obviously we often see that the right to audit is kind of like a standard and it's just put in all contracts, but really it's probably making sure that for those suppliers that you're going to audit and making sure that's in there. And if someone's providing you with very low level information, then is it really required to have that? And finally, the termination and exit strategy. So thinking about, okay, well, actually, what's is this? Are they almost like the single source of this particular service, or is there a way of kind of moving or manipulating away from this?
Good point to note there at the bottom, though. Some of these elements can be included in the questionnaire initially.
Exactly that, and you may be able to get some of that detail. Yeah, indeed.
Excellent.
So then, what we often get asked is, okay, where does this stop? So obviously, we know our suppliers, but there's those suppliers have suppliers, and there is a supply chain, obviously, within modern organizations. So what you can do is go through a bit of a supply chain mapping exercise, and probably that's with key subcontractors. So if you know that there's a key supplier, understanding their subcontractors may be key. It is when they're processing sort of sensitive information. So if we're talking about PII, sensitive information, even some particularly commercial sensitive information, you may want to understand their processes and their sub processes, and as we said before, having an element in the contract that ensures that if those change, that they inform you of those changes.
But what would happen if a supplier didn't want to share this information?
Yeah, no, indeed, it's difficult, isn't it? So again, it comes down to risk. So what are you going to do? Are you going to just be able to work with that and effectively not understand that risk, but the service that they can provide you is so critical, or hopefully you can come to an agreement where they can share some level of information. Maybe they might not be able to provide you with copies of their policies, but they might be able to provide you with, show them to you via a team session, even to show you that they've got them. This last point is an interesting one, is that what we're seeing increasingly is when it comes to the supply chain, it's trying to sort of push that requirement onto them. So rather than saying, okay, we've got the right to audit your subcontractors, which could obviously be very onerous and very, very detailed, more push that onto the supplier, so that we want a report from them in terms of sort of measurements and metrics of their supplier management process and their key suppliers. So if, for example, they've got these key SLAs that they're managing and they're reporting through to you, that would give you some idea about how they're managing those suppliers.
Brilliant. It's definitely a supply chain world, though, isn't it?
Indeed, and it definitely depends on the different industries that you're working within. But like you say, if particularly like kind of the manufacturing area, there really is a very detailed and complex supply chain.
Absolutely. Right. So the next session, then, the next part of the session, we're going to look into auditing your critical suppliers and the approach that you may want to take or should be taking. In terms of doing that deep dive with them.
Yeah, indeed. So really, what we say is that you've got a level of, you obviously engaged with that supplier, you've completed a questionnaire, you've obviously taken those self-assessments, but then what you want to do is you want to pick on certain aspects. So what we wouldn't recommend is that you select the whole of 27001 and say, right, okay, we're going to go and we're going to do the whole of the management system, all of the controls, and also we're going to throw in a few more controls in from another standard as well. It's really having a targeted area. So this particular supplier is managing your key finance system. Okay, we want to know your user management of your support users, and that's a real sort of focus of this. So really planning that audit around that area, maybe an area of focus. There's a difference when we tend to do audits of the level of kind of engagement that you receive, whether it's an on-site audit or a remote audit. Obviously, a remote audit can be conducted quite easily. It can be a couple of hours, but actually, in terms of sometimes you miss out on some of the kind of that kind of ability to be able to build more of a relationship, and also the ability to kind of see a bit more about the organisation, maybe see their visitor management process, see those aspects.
I suppose on-site visits, if you were assessing like a data centre, physical security would be really important to see face to face.
Absolutely, that So there's going to be some of those areas. So if you were sharing information with a paper archiving site, obviously you'd want an on-site audit. Them taking you around on the laptop's probably not relevant. It's thinking about who's going to be involved in those, and thinking about how do we actually get that information in, and then dealing with remediation plans, so that you're sharing something obviously within a timely manner, that you provide an audit report back through to them to sort of say the detail and the aspects that you've found.
That's an interesting point, Matt, on remediation action. So say, for instance, you've gone through the process, you've onboarded them as a supplier, you've been happy with risk and all of that good stuff. What happens if you've done an audit 6 months later and there were major gaps and the audit was, let's say, not very strong?
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, so what we want to see is that you would then be adjusting your supply management process. So you're going back and you're then saying, okay, the risk of this is increased. Actually, okay, well, how are we going to do? Are we still happy to just work with them? Are we still happy to accept that level of risk? Are there further controls that we want to put in place on our side? Do we want the supplier to be able to make some improvements? Maybe if you've uncovered some aspects, they may have said, okay, well, we're going to work on these and we'll come back to you. So hopefully some of those would be sort of addressed just through doing that.
Yeah, and a bit of conversation as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
So these just come at some of the areas that that you sort of want to be able to look at, and the typical areas that we see. So probably the kind of the key ones are those top two on the top left. So we've got around access control. So how do we know that that the individuals have got access to certain aspects, the privileged access and all those elements, and the data protection requirements. So if, for example, they're processing data on your behalf, how are they retaining that data? How are they storing it? Is it encrypted? All of these different aspects that are a key part of that data protection requirement. What you might find is actually with certain suppliers, actually there might be technical testing. So rather than doing a kind of a desktop audit, actually what you want to arrange is a penetration test, so that actually you get a technical test of that system, and that may give you sort of more value than perhaps a desktop walkthrough of their development processes or something like that.
Could that be particularly useful maybe for a SaaS platform, and if it's an application web app that someone's looking at or using? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it, and so that we can kind of go into quite a lot of technical assessment about all those different areas. Another one that probably worth highlighting is the kind of training and awareness, because really what you want to be able to understand is, okay, is this an area of weakness kind of across the organization, or how have they addressed that particular area?
Okay, brilliant.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Matt. Okay, so developing and exercising incident management plans. I'm really intrigued by this next session as to how we bring this all together, really.
Yeah. So
that and supply management.
Yeah, indeed. So really what we've sort of been thinking about is how suppliers are included within this exercising, and really when is it relevant. And I think probably the first thing that's sort of worth saying is it's only really worth doing with your most key and critical suppliers, really. The kind of the level of detail and the level of information you require from them, the level of work supporting one another to create an exercise that's meaningful, it really means that they need to be a critical supplier. So you need to have that relationship to be able to work with them, to be able to understand their incident response plans, and really want to sort of think about different scenarios. I wouldn't always go out to all my suppliers and say that the incident is that they've had an incident and it's you responding. Maybe it's equally that you've had an incident and they're helping you respond. So that it's a realistic aspect, that it's not just you're not sort of always blaming them. So that then we want to have something that's a realistic exercise. So obviously we've got some ideas and some examples of some on the next page actually.
And Matt, do you have any examples of potential suppliers that this would be beneficial for?
Yeah. So actually, if we have a look, the sorts of scenarios that we tend to see is a sort of a cyber attack against a particular supplier, and there's some really interesting aspects that sort of come out from a cyber attack, because it can obviously have impacts in a whole range of different areas, and also you're then thinking about is there a data protection issue? Is this going to be a reportable incident? Is this a data breach? Have we got those sorts of timelines? And also, what happens if there is a cyber attack is typically legal teams get engaged quite early on, and so the level of information that can be shared gets restricted quite early. So you might find that the organisation is just stating facts. We have suffered a cyber attack. And they're not really able to provide that much more information, but sort of beginning to work through some of those scenarios gets kind of help some of those areas. Another one that's going good with thinking about a sort of disruption to service delivery. So where you think about maybe you work with a call center, or sort of you got an issue with a managed service provider. Okay, how is that going to impact on you as an organization, and how would you and your supplier be able to kind of overcome and work through those issues? Another interesting one that we've seen a couple of times is more kind of reputational, or kind of the integrity type impact. Okay, you're working with this particular supplier. What does how does that reflect on you as an organization? If there's been this kind of impact.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Matt. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time for some questions. So thanks to everyone that's put a question in the box there. The first one, Matt, I think I'll get your advice and guidance on. Supply contracts, should they all be the same? Do you have contracts that are the same depending on what the supplier is? I think is essentially
no, indeed.
So
indeed, so there's going to be some standards. So there's going to be some standard contractual clauses probably that will be within all contracts, but for the most part they are going to be tailored, be based on the services provided, based on the risks that particular supplier have.
Okay. Yeah. So Matt, another question is, when should a business look at using a supplier risk management tool?
Yeah. So I think it's as the level of complexity that you have with your suppliers grows. So if you rely on one or two suppliers, then probably doing assessments with them in a manual basis is probably fairly acceptable. When that grows, and when you start having individuals who have responsibility for this area, and that element grows, then really the requirement for a tool becomes apparent. Managing all of the different timescales and the refresh times, and when this supplier is being onboarded, and you're doing a short list of 3 suppliers, can become quite an onerous process if you haven't got some kind of automation and assistance to help you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Matt, we've had another question come in. Are we looking at CIA in terms of criticality?
Okay, yeah, so that's an interesting one from an information security perspective. So CIA is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And what you might find is this is a really good way of being able to assess the level of criticality, because what we have is you may have certain suppliers where you're sharing certain information with them, and so the information that you're sharing with them is confidential. But actually, in terms of the availability of that information, or the integrity of that, is less so. So it's not as important that it's kept up to date and accurate, or nor that it's available. So, but actually, the confidentiality of that information is very key. So by going through assessing the CI&A, it's a way of getting quite a consistent assessment, rather than just assessing the criticality and saying, oh, it's high, it's medium, it's low. This is how a Briscoe does it, actually, by assessing the CI&A. And also what Briscoe allows you to do is to assess the information asset. So if you said, okay, we've assessed HR data, and the confidentiality of that is very high, and then that HR data is shared with a supplier, then we would get an idea that that's actually a high risk supplier, and so that would pull through from there.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. I think we've probably got time for one more question, just conscious of the time. How do businesses keep up to date with new threats and changes in regulation?
Indeed. So yeah, obviously regulations change and update all the time, and obviously as the new threat. So really it's looking at the industry sources available, looking at that sort of threat intelligence side of things to kind of understand how threats are evolving. So for example, the NCSC provide insight into kind of recent cyber incidents, and trying to understand, okay, how that's changing and evolving. Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Matt. That's really useful. And if we didn't have time to address your question, don't worry, we'll reach out with answers, or we could always jump on calls and maybe bring Matt in, depending on what his diary's looking like. Fantastic. So how can URM help you? So off the back of this webinar, we're offering a free demo of the Supplier module in Abriska. It takes around 45 minutes. We're also offering a 30-day trial. So if you want to use the tool, if you want to try it out a little bit, see how it can bring benefit to your supplier risk management process, that is able to be accessed. And we're also offering a half-day supplier risk management process review, where one of our experts sits with you, understands, at a high level what exactly you're doing with your supplier risk management and how it could potentially be improved. So please register your interest on your feedback form. Our upcoming events. So SOC 2 was mentioned in the webinar. We're doing a what, why, and how after the summer period. So in September, you can register for that event now, and you'll get invited to that in the future. And please, if you wouldn't mind completing your feedback form, we take your feedback very seriously and use it to mold future events. Also, feel free, if you haven't been able to ask any questions yet and you have any, pop them on your feedback form. And as I said, we'll get back in touch and address those questions for you. And lastly, from myself and Matt, thank you very much for taking the time, spend the time with us today. Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.